Daily habits have a huge impact on our focus, and so I'm really, really big on removing the smartphone as the center of gravity for our daily rhythms. I think this is an enormous impact, not just on our productivity and our focus, but also our spiritual formation. So, for example, in my book I write a little bit about some habits of technology, one being scripture before phone, which is a way to decentralize your morning. If you're looking at your phone the first thing in the morning, you're starting to get into your emails or get into social media and get into this or that, and your mind begins spinning 1,000 different directions and looking for love in 1,000 different places right away. Now when you flip that, small habit but huge effects, you look to the scriptures, even briefly. For example, this morning for me it was 5 or 10 minutes in a psalm. But I start to think about and focus on the love of God for me, which then sends me to work as a person not needing to get love, but as a person who is filled up and can finally give love. And these kind of small habits, especially around your smartphone, have a huge impact on your focus and your productivity internally, as in knowing who you are, and externally, as in able to do work. Another one, for example, is I practice kneeling prayer 3 times a day, morning, noon, and evening. And the reason I feel like that's really important is because other technologies would gladly structure our day for us. We can spend our whole day just responding to notifications from our phone or our computer. And they're not all bad, but they're not going to focus us. They're not going to make us productive. They're not going to keep us centered. So practices like punctuating the day with prayer are ways to center ourselves in peace and focus, in the mindfulness of God's love for us and love for our neighbors. And then we can go into all those notifications and work well within them. So I think taking the smartphone out of your center of gravity and moving it to the periphery and putting the spiritual disciplines, prayer, scripture, community in the center of gravity changes the game completely and changes your focus. So one of the daily habits that I practice and write about in my book, The Common Rule, is the habit of turning your phone off for an hour every day. And so I usually do this in the evening when I get home so I can be present with my wife and kids. But one of the great things about developing habits is that they become background rhythms that start to have bigger effects. And one of the bigger effects for me of just regularly turning off my phone every evening is I have become comfortable with being unavailable. So I've gotten used to the idea that sometimes I'm not going to be reachable, and that's actually a good thing. And this has started to bleed into work in, I think, healthy ways. So for example, when I'm asked to do something at work, and I'll take something that happened one time, a client called me and his company was acquiring a Canadian subsidiary, and they needed a lawyer to review this big contract that somebody had written, and they needed it really quickly. And it was one of those requests where I was like, I don't know if I can get this done in time. But what I did was I turned off my devices, I left the office, I went somewhere quiet, and I had to review an 80-page contract in detail on a quick turnaround. And I look back at that time and I think there's a lot of times in my life where I wouldn't have been able to do that because I would have just sat amidst all my distractions and worked slowly and worked in increments and wouldn't have been able to serve this client. But because I now become used to the idea of being unavailable, actually is a good thing, I was able to unplug, say I need to do this one thing for this one person and I need to do it well. And it helped me become very productive, very focused, and I got the job done. And then of course you can go back to the office and return all those calls and emails that are waiting for you. But I think that habit of learning to be unplugged as a way of presence and as a way of productivity is an incredibly important habit for our modern world.